Hello, my name's Kath Berry, and today we have a very unique webinar for you, which you won't see anywhere else. That is looking at the clinical approaches to the treatment with acupuncture for refugees who have been victims of torture and trauma. This is presented by Naomi Abeshouse and was a presentation at a community acupuncture workshop in Sydney, Australia. Naomi Abeshouse is an acupuncturist, Chinese herbalist and doula based in Sydney, Australia. She's the co-founder of Red Tent, a specialist multimodality clinic for fertility, pregnancy, childbirth and postnatal care. Her presentation today is based on her clinical and managerial role at a unique acupuncture clinic at STARTS, the service treatment and rehabilitation of torture and trauma survivors. Naomi completed a Bachelor of Health Science in Traditional Chinese Medicine at the University of Technology, Sydney, and has been studying and practicing for over 11 years. She completed postgraduate studies in Guangxi University in China. Naomi has also studied Manuka protocols, a form of Japanese acupuncture, pediatric acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine, and doula training. Prior to all this, she studied massage therapy, aromatherapy, kinesiology, and shiatsu. Naomi attributes her balanced approach to treatment as coming from a family of doctors, with both parents being GPs and a sister who completed her medical training. Medicine and health are always a big part of family and social discussions, and as a result, she has developed a respect and understanding of the Western medical model. She has a deep respect for both modalities and believes that wonderful results can be achieved from their integration. It's important to note that some of the images and content in this webinar may be upsetting to some viewers. It's advised that you choose an appropriate setting and an appropriate time to watch this, and certainly not in the company of young children. We do hope you enjoy this webinar.
Hi everyone. So I've been asked to talk about this program that we set up at STARTS. STARTS stands for Service Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors. There are several different divisions of it in Carramar, Auburn, Liverpool, and then they've got little sister and brother things all over the place. So we set this up originally as a volunteer-based program. It was actually a group called the Barefoot Doctors and now One Health that organised the development of that, which I think took a lot of work over a long period of time. And then I started at the very beginning of that, and over the years would have like different, pretty much like new students come in as an opportunity to try and develop their skills. We were all starting off as volunteers. That was a pretty bad failure in all. If we're giving away what worked and what didn't. The students and being volunteers at the same time, not getting paid, working with very difficult, high emotional type of cases, there was a high turnover. And with these kind of clients, you can't really have too much of a high turnover because of the different types of attachment. But I'll get into that a little bit later. Working with survivors of torture and trauma, they're all refugees, I think, except one client who got into a bit of trouble somewhere. So they come from absolutely all walks of life, different cultures, different languages, different levels of English, different understandings of medicine, of their relationship with you as a doctor, so there's quite a bit to navigate. But in particular, working with torture is quite different to working with other forms of trauma, and it's quite different to the types of trauma that you see in your own personal clinics. So the fact is, torture actually is a very intentional and systemic act to create the most amount of damage. So damage to the body, but damage to that person's sense of self, to who they are, but also to create damage to their community, to instill fear. And it does that very well. And in doing this, it actually involves total boundary violations. So you can imagine then when you're working one-on-one with someone, how important it is to kind of maintain and uphold professional boundaries in that area, to be very mindful that you're dealing with a person who isn't feeling entirely whole and connected, because with that boundary violation creates a whole pile of splitting off that's a result of trauma. I'd love to talk about the whole neurology of trauma as well and what impact that plays, and then also how important acupuncture is for that. But I'm going to assume that I'm talking to the converted and you guys have a sense of how well we can work with severe trauma. So the other thing with torture is it involves, the memories are very much in the body. So, you're working with, a cut here, the memory, of course you've got, your chi blood stimulation and, impact to circulation through the meridians and all of these things that we can identify. But also there's a very real emotional connection to the pain and the trauma that I think exists in that space as well. You've probably all heard of the term post-traumatic stress disorder, and that usually applies to, that was a term that developed after the Vietnam War, really, when they're seeing the type of common experiences in post-combat soldiers. In these kind of victims, I think it goes beyond that model, the type that you can read in the DSM-4, because it's very complex. So with PTSD, obviously there's initially a trauma, and then following that there's a whole pile of intrusive thoughts, intrusive memories that can be called flashbacks. It can be nightmares, panicky situation. They're existing in hyperarousal, so their central nervous system is constantly on hyperstimulation. So, what can be like a little, tap for us, their body's primed to be constantly in that flight or fight mode. And constriction, which is a term, I won't go into the whole dynamics of it, but basically they will restrict the type of activities that they do in order to try and avoid the things that will trigger them. So for some people it might be noise, it might be the colour red, it might be a word, blood, different people have different triggers that will then set off even more arousal in them getting into that state. And pretty much in the clinic, because I was there 1 day a week, and because of the complexity of the cases, we were sent the most challenging and difficult cases. So all our clients presented with pain, whether it was severe migraines or pain from injuries or direct trauma. And the nature of chronic pain and the nature of chronic PTSD is that has such an impact on our neurophysiology and our endocrinology. So the way our hormones and everything actually end up existing in our body ends up being in a very different state. So the role for acupuncture is I think it's quite clear here. If you look at some of the literature, a lot of the, people who are very well established, so there's actually no clear drug treatment, which we can find quite surprising. They'll throw their antidepressants, their anti-anxiety, antipsychotic drugs at them, but to no particular success one way or another. So they're really kind of scrounging for a solid approach. And similarly, they'll be commonly treated with CBT and psychology and counselling. And if you talk to pretty much any of the social workers and the counsellors there, a lot of them say it's not particularly effective because they're already so charged. It's really difficult sometimes for the memory to be continuous or for them to even be able to go there in a way that things can actually come up and be dealt with and changed. And particularly, a lot of the time, these clients, then whilst they might be relatively safe here in Australia, they're not feeling safe. Like their family might still be in a war-torn country. They might still not know where their father is or their mother is, or different things and events are still often happening. So it's, a lot of the other treatments aren't particularly effective. What acupuncture can do, and amazingly, is really regulate things. So, you have someone who hasn't, I think one of the first clients I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes in 9 years. So you can imagine what that does to somebody's mind, to someone's body, to their capacity to function. And how is that person going to sit down for an hour and try and rehash? They're not really in a sound enough state to begin that kind of work. And literally one treatment, they came back, they slept 5 hours that night. That was the first treatment. And that continued. And then I'll talk a little bit later if I've got time about how to monitor the treatments. But what we can do is really reset things and really help to regulate that nervous system that's preventing so much of their capacity in daily life. And of course, debilitating symptoms like severe pain, if it's painful walking, if it's painful standing, it's going to affect their capacity to sleep again, which has an impact on everything, to work, to have much joy of life. So if we can work primarily on decreasing stress and letting them sleep, reducing pain, that's already putting us at an incredible opportunity for them to change their lives. So what kind of clients do we see? I think one of the biggest mistakes is thinking that they are so different. I know I just said they're really different, but they're really, they're really not. They come from very diverse backgrounds, very diverse cultures, but at the end of the day, they've got, 4 limbs, body, and, we're all human and we all have, very similar ways of reacting and managing to things. So they're humans who've been brought up in a very different environment and have gone through some pretty major trauma. And as I mentioned before, going through that major trauma causes a splitting. And we need to understand that their capacity to recover is very much impacted by their history. So obviously there's a bit of huge ranges of the level of trauma. So if a woman was, raped as one-off occasion, or if she was imprisoned for 9 years and, had to witness a whole pile of other things and was, the level of trauma is going to have an impact. Obviously the same things that we see in our private practice, their constitution, how responsive they are to treatment, and as I mentioned before, their current situation and level of support. Culture is a really interesting one here, and there's so many, sometimes I felt like I was walking around in a sitcom, because the amount of strange things that would happen and cross-cultural exchanges, I had one woman who was literally, before I had the needle, I was going over to her. She was a woman from Sierra Leone, from a tribal village. I was going over to her and she starts convulsing on the table and screaming, paining, paining, paining. And I'm like, what's going on here? Panicking, going, you're not meant to feel pain. If you're not comfortable, we don't have to do this. And the interpreter was just sitting there there's this, I'm panicking, the woman's convulsing, screaming. I'm going, what is going on? And she just said, just put the needles in. I'm like, I'm not putting the needles in if she's terrified and she's in pain. She was like, no, you don't understand, this is her way of showing you respect. That's showing that the treatment is working, because my mother would do it, her mother would do it, they would all do it, just put the needles in. I'm like, what? And so a lot of the times I'd actually take I put the needles in. She continued to groan and do little convulses and, walked out with the interpreter and got the story, how it was with, traditional shamanic healers and how that was getting translated to this situation. Okay, you're just doing your job. It's interesting to have an understanding of the culture you're working with, to know when you're on track and off track. Yeah, working with interpreters, I could talk for 20 minutes on that. That was probably one of the most difficult things to work out, how to manage them. So, how many of you have actually worked with interpreters before? A few of you? So, usually in this situation, you've got 2 options. One is to have a live interpreter come in, or a lot of these services have a line that you can call up and they'll give you a translation service over the phone. There's benefits to both. What I found is do your research before you bring in a live interpreter. So if you've got other people in the organisation that's already working with this group of clients, find out from them who are the best interpreters to use. Because if you go random, you literally get random. I've had to break up a fight between my interpreter and a client in the room. and I've had a Bosnian interpreter show up for a Serbian, and that has also happened on the phone, and that's created major issues. And also, you'll just get people who literally is like that scene in Lost in Translation, where you've got, Bill Murray saying this whole blah, 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 and, does this whole thing, and the Japanese interpreter says, he says yes. And you'll get that as well. And the interpreters often think, the ones that do the most damage are the ones that think they're helping. So they'll tell you, they'll actually embellish on what you say, and there's a whole pile of things that go on, and you kind of hear the word banana in there, you go, hold on, what are you saying about a banana? Oh, because I know bananas are good, they're really good for this and that. I'm like, what are you doing? So there's all these really interesting things that come up and how to work with them. The benefit of working with the telephone services is you can maintain a bit more anonymity. You can hang up if you need to, but still sometimes it means they're not feeling very safe, or they just don't talk very much. So I find the clients often will talk more when there's a physical interpreter there. But there's also, there's other issues of privacy as well. Like there were certain groups, if they've had a very, they come from a minority culture, they're used to being persecuted. So a lot of people that might speak their language, they've also had an experience of not really, having a very good relationship with their race. So you've got to kind of keep all of these things in mind, do as much cultural consultation as you can. And I learned, every time I had a new culture walk in the door, it was like a massive learning curve. And use the people around you as much as you can. Because, you make mistakes and you find them out. One thing, though, that's incredibly important, and it's actually what one of the women I mentioned before, Judith Herman, talks about being the quintessential thing of working with anyone that's suffering from PTSD, in particular torture survivors, is establishing that trust and safety is first and paramount, and probably 80% of the work. So I was kind of making notes while Kath was talking before about community and multi-bed acupuncture clinics, and there's a whole obvious pile of issues that come up with establishing trust and safety within an environment which is very open. Not impossible, but some pretty major issues, especially when you're looking at across, a male practitioner and female clients, and there's a lot of stuff. So understanding that with PTSD, there's a very easy trigger mechanism for re-traumatisation. So the most obvious way that you can do that is saying, so tell me what's going on. And the history can sometimes just kind of come blah, where, this is happening, that's happening, and this is happening, and this was here. And I think one of, also in the first year of working there, I had a client go from head to toe on, he had such systemic torture, we literally had to go slowly through every part of the body. And in that situation, it was, for him, he needed and wanted to do that. There was another interpreter there who he'd worked with before, who was very wonderful. When they're good, they can be so good. And that was a way of him kind of getting acknowledged and having some of his story heard. In that situation, I let it happen, and I also didn't have to run away and do another room at that point. And I tend to, with my first clients, give them that whole hour just on their own as well. Other times you can see someone just starts to talk about something, and you've got to watch their body, watch their pupils, watch their movements to see they're getting triggered, because they might be able to just keep that same monotonous talk through it, but you can see they're actually getting quite aroused, and we don't want that, and we don't need that. We're not, our best role is not a counsellor, we're an acupuncturist. So I would tend to try and bring it back, or in a not a way of just kind of going, brushing them off, but more like, I can see you're getting really upset now, I can see you're getting really agitated. Have you noticed, your shoulders have come up around your ears? Do you get headaches often when you think about this? So you can kind of bring it back into a kind of somatic awareness as a way of helping them regulate, as well as, steering them away from things that are taking them into their potential triggers. Another thing that I mentioned with PTSD is their memory and their cognition are much more impaired than the rest of ours. So we need to repeat ourselves a lot if you want them to understand something or you want them to change something in their lives, especially if it's something they don't want to hear. It's helpful to repeat it and make sure that they've understood what you're trying to say. And managing effective discharge with these clients is very difficult because a lot of them are isolated. Their level of debilitation is so poor. You have helped them and they develop a connection with you, and they've lost so many other people in their lives a lot of the time that sometimes when they leave sessions with you, like finish a course of treatments, that can trigger again like a grief and another feeling of loss. So the way I learned to do this was to have contained course treatment, so they understood from the beginning that there were 8. And then as we got past the 4th time, I started telling them every week. So we're about halfway along now. And then the next week we've got a few more to go. Okay, I'll see you next week. And then, you know, and each time, I might even say it a couple of times, or, you know, it's been lovely working with you, it's a shame next week is our last week. You know, like every time, so that they've got a sense of feeling contained. And I guess that's another way of maintaining boundaries with it as well, because, and it's hard from a personal level to say goodbye as well. Like, you do get more attached. You do find it's harder to keep your own boundaries when people have got such severe need and trauma. Now, the need for that can seem kind of obvious because it can be very supportive, but it's more important for yourself to be able to maintain your professional boundaries, because often they're in such situations where, you know, they don't have housing, they're getting hassled where they're at home, they don't have any money, they don't have food, they've lost this, they've lost that, they can't talk any English, and they don't have any other support. And you can't take that on. You end up taking on a lot more of a social work role in terms of directing them to people that can help them, but it's so important that there is somewhere for them to be sent. Otherwise, like there was one situation where a woman came in and she was in so much fear because she'd been basically getting assaulted and harassed by her neighbour, and she was severely disabled. Her social worker had gone AWOL for several months, and what's the point of putting her on the table when she's just going to go straight back into an environment where it's, you know, it's unsafe? So I took her down to the police station. There was no one else to do it. So you do end up stepping out of your role in certain ways, but it's much easier if you've got someone that you can direct them to do that too. So it's a bit of a balance of working out how much to step outside of your role as an acupuncturist to help them get what they really need, and how much to, you know, really make sure you're doing the job that you're actually best at, the job that you're there for. And knowing your limitations is a really important aspect of that. So I think when I first started working there, like after every day I'd be like a total mess, like absolutely exhausted. I had no energy for anything else. Would it have been a good idea for me to do another full day of it then? No, like no chance. And then knowing, okay, while I'm learning these lessons and working out what it's about for me and how to manage it, I know that afterwards I can't go out that night, you know, and I've got to work things through on my own as well. Can I take questions now? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does it really draws out your emotional sort of energy?
Yeah, and it does, but I think the question was, does it draw upon your emotional energy working with these clients? It definitely does, but I like to think of it more as an opportunity for me to work out what's going on. I don't think it serves, like, I found it really unhelpful actually when people go, oh my God, you're working culture and trauma science, that must be so draining. Do you find that really drain you? It's actually, they can only drain what you give, you know. So if often what I worked out after, you know, I had so many different lessons of working out what was affecting me. And one time, you know, I really worked out what was happening was was on actually a very existential level for me. Like every time I went there, my idea of what the world is and who the world is, or the way the world works and what human beings are, was getting challenged. So it was actually a very existential thing. Like I'm a very optimistic person. I think people are wonderful. I think the world's a great place. And then you go there every week and you just have that, you know, all over the world, you put the same circumstances in place and, you know, this horrific stuff happens. And I think until I actually took myself out and went, okay, you know, and worked through some of those issues myself, go, okay, the world actually can be a great place, not in the way I was thinking about it before, but it can still be a great place, and there's all of that. And then I'm like, all right, I'm not getting tired anymore, you know? So it's about, like, I felt like every time it was kind of really pulling on me emotionally, it was an opportunity for me to kind of get directed towards something that I probably needed to address in my life as well.
We appreciate more where you live.
You definitely do. Like, and you know, towards the end, it was just wonderful. Like, I come from here seeing, you know, the most horrendous things, and I'd be like, oh, thank God, I'm going back to my clinic. Bit of sinusitis, you know, bring that on. It's just, it definitely does put things in perspective, and it has its gifts. Like the way these clients respond is beyond what you can imagine. What you find is like their level, if you know your average person, your average client comes into your clinic at a certain level, these clients are much further on, like down, like they're just existing.
Just getting back to your clinic model, was it a multi-bed practice? How was it set up?
No, it wasn't a multi-bed practice in the sense of that one where it's all an open space and curtains and everything. I was doing 2 rooms at a time, occasionally 3, but they were separated. Yeah, so more like I was just using the counselling rooms at starts.
Did you used to do that in Naomi?
Yeah, I stopped working there in December last year. Yeah, I was there for about 6 years. Yeah.
Did you use a lot of earpods? I'm just interested.
No, actually. I started off, because in my private clinic I love some of those earpods and I love using Shen Men.
Yeah.
What happened is it actually seemed to really freak some people out having the earpods.
Oh, right, okay.
And so I stopped. Yeah.
Oh.
I don't, like, it happened across about 3 different cultures with the Iraqis, Bosnian and Afghani. They hated it. So I stopped. Yeah. So I actually just wanted to hop into this results page because what I wanted to show is the difference in how things, how these clients respond. What you get is this phenomenal peak in the first few weeks, beyond what you can imagine. Like, these are people who have been in serious agony for like 10, sometimes 20 years, who have gone through such atrocious situations, and the results are incredible in the first 2 to 3 weeks. So their sleep changes very, very quickly. Their level of pain changes very, very quickly. And then what you see is, like, it actually, I think all of them start to roll into each other because they start feeling more hopeful for their lives. Like, things can improve again, things can change, they might be able to function. I had one guy come in and said, you know, I slept all week and now I love my life, I love walking again, I even love my wife. You know, it was bless him. So things change quite dramatically. But then you'll also have these big splops again. So if something happens in their country, if they see something on the telly, something reminds them, they can go right back down to where they were. You get acupuncture in and they'll come back up here. They won't stay at that same level, which at first was frustrating to me because I was like going, okay, well, we know where you can be. Let's try and work you back up to, you know, we've seen that you've had a week or 2 of that.
Could you show the 3 different colours that we're seeing?
Yes. So here I put refugees at an 8-week course of treatments. In the red, what I wanted to show was if you continue their treatment indefinitely. And I did that with some at the beginning. And this is what I probably normally see in my clinic, the yellow one. So what I got from this after working and, you know, just seeing people continuously was I was realising I was actually really just holding them at where they were. I wasn't able to get any better. So when you mentioned before the more treatments, the more effective the results, in this situation it wasn't, unfortunately. It kind of seemed to hit a ceiling, and then it was very difficult to let them go for me as well, because they'd still have ongoing symptoms. They're still far beyond the norm of what you'd see in a normal clinic. They'd still be getting triggered all the time by different things. They wouldn't be hitting the same low as they were, but your capacity to really help them from there wasn't, or at least I wasn't able to support them beyond that. Yes?
Could you just elaborate on the graph a little bit and how you got that information?
This was totally non-clinical research based on what I saw. So it's kind of just by clinical observations. Yeah. I was at one point, because we were getting such wonderful results, I was really keen to try and get some research in here to show how we were being able to have such good results. It is logistically a nightmare because of the amount of different cultures, the amount of different language. The compliance level is very different amongst this group of clients as well. Like, it took me probably 4 to 5 years to be able to get a really effective functioning clinic, because I'd have people turning up absolutely all over the place. Some would come 2 hours early, some would come 3 hours late, some would come with, you know, their entire family. So, you know, like, it was wild at first. But there was quite a lot that I learned to be able to really get them coming in regularly and on time. And some of that was I think, getting those first few weeks of results, because once they've seen those results, they're in that trust and safety and confidence in acupuncture is present. So what I got from that was, if you're working with this level, I thought the best way of managing it would be to do like an 8-week course, and then with follow-up. So, because as I mentioned before, like, totally finishing with you is difficult from both of you, but you can do just 2 to 4 weeks to kind of help them bump up to that level again if it's gone down, maybe a few times a year, so that they can continue, come back, you know, get a little bit of a top up, and then keep going. It would be so wonderful if we could get some research in, because it's just, you can get such incredible results with people who are so severely debilitated. In establishing trust and safety, the referral method is really important. So if there is a counsellor that they're already seeing, or a social worker that they've already developed a relationship with, I think that's probably your best way of getting the client in and staying. So we've talked about boundaries a little bit, and this goes probably across all of us in our general practices as well. But how to take care of yourself in the midst of all of this. And I've talked about kind of identifying your own issues, and you've got to sometimes provide yourself with a forum and a mechanism for doing that. So for me, working at Starts, I had a wonderful physio there who we worked together with, and we actually ended up debriefing each other most of the time. So, you know, possibly once, actually we just kind of do it over a cup of tea mostly, but sometimes you might need to create a more, you know, systematic way of doing that. And I think, you know, with any of us who want to, you know, have really meaningful work and contribute to the community, we fall into this one, which is like narcissism versus helplessness. So, like, you either think, right, I've got these great things, I can change the world, you know, I can really help everybody, and then you can go into, like, oh my God, what is this little pin going to be able to do for all of this in the world? You know, oh my God. So being aware of the different aspects of your personality and how that impacts things. And then, yeah, make it as much about you as you can. Yeah, rather than, you know, this person's doing that to me and this one's making me feel that and this one's a pain in the ass and all of that, yeah. So those are my little tips. And I might just wrap it up at that.
I hope you enjoyed this free webinar. Please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel and please share on social media. The world will be a better place when more people know about the benefits of acupuncture.